I'm glad we're having this interview now and not a couple years ago, because I might have just gone into a depressed silence for several minutes at this point. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to seem really smart. I'm a genius, I'm super literary, and forgot that kind of childish love that got me into it in the first place. One writer said writing a novel feels like pushing a peanut across a dirty floor with your nose for several years in a row. But in a way, I've always hated my writing, you know? Because as a fellow artist, you care about your work, you care a lot about your work. And when you come back to it and you find it's not as good as your feeling and vision, to me, that's a painful feeling.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be, wherever you are. This is the Emerging Artist Podcast, which means I'm Scott Markowitz, and I'm here with Shiree Nichole.
Hi, Scott. And we have a special guest today here at Apaccio Coffee. Did I say it
We
right?
are at a Copio Coffee. That was close.
At least I'm consistent. That's all I can say about that. I always say it wrong. But we're here with a local author and teacher, James Zwerneman. How are you, James?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you for having me, guys.
Full disclosure, James is my next door neighbor.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Isn't that crazy?
I love it.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Sometimes he'll be walking the dogs and I'll be walking and trying to burn some calories, and we'll fall into a conversation about Steven Spielberg.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's a big Spielberg fan. We're both big cinema fans, and
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing, that a person who deals with the written language is so in tune with the visual arts as well. And there's so many similarities between the two, because when you write, you're trying to create and elicit an image in people's mind. Let's dive into this, James, because I think it's so cool. You're somebody who has been studying the art of writing for so long, and you've had aspirations for so long to be a paid published author. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, I know you were talking earlier about the why of why you got into this. And I was thinking about that question on the drive here. And I was thinking of intellectual answers to that, but I was also thinking of the emotional answer, which for me is more real. And it ties into Steven Spielberg because Jurassic Park was one of my favorite books when I was younger. I read that book so many times. My dad actually had to take the book away from me, so he said, you got to read something else now.
That's funny.
But at the same time that I was reading and falling in love with that book, and I always loved dinosaurs, Jurassic Park was coming out as a movie. Steven Spielberg directed it, and it's got that great cast with Jeff Goldblum and everybody. And there's just this joy of an amazing story with some philosophy thrown in that I didn't even know that I needed and wanted, and cool ideas, because Michael Crichton he's a deep thinker, and now if we're getting scared about AI, the idea of the monsters breaking free from the park and our thoughts that we can control that, super relevant, right?
Yeah.
And the feeling of inevitability of that in fact, if we get wiped out by AI, Jurassic Park may turn out to be the most prophetic book of all time.
Oh my God.
And actually, I think before Jurassic Park, he did Westworld, the screenplay for Westworld. That's about AI, right?
That is about it.
But anyway, I just loved Jurassic Park and being in the world of stories, whether it was the movie version or the book version. And I went on to read a bunch of Crichton and read books that had the similar, just all engaging effect, like Ender's Game. It was just awesome. I just loved it. It made me happy. And I thought, what could be better than spending your life doing something that has to do with story?
Oh, I love that. So as artists, Shiree, we're telling stories, but in a very different way.
Correct.
At the core, I think the goal is the same. Ultimately, we're trying to elicit some kind of emotional response.
We like to have a positive effect on the world and those around us. And you are an author of children's books. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you get started with that?
Yeah.
What was your first book?
I like that you like that ask question in this sequence, because I got the idea for the children's books when I was in graduate school at UC Irvine.
Okay.
And I think that going to Johns Hopkins for undergrad to do writing, and then going to UC Irvine, a really good graduate program with amazing teachers and other really smart writers, I started to lose my real why for why I was doing this. And the real why had to do with that joy and my particular affinity for a certain type of story. And when you go to college and graduate programs, sometimes other types of stories are what is seen as good. And you can fall into that trap. And nobody's malicious here, but it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to seem really smart. I'm a genius, I'm super literary, and forgot that kind of childish love that got me into it in the first place. The idea for the kids' books actually came when I was working on a novel about cavemen that was like in the George Saunders style. I was like trying to be witty, and it was totally not me. I was trying to do some stuff that was totally not me. And as I was writing this disastrous novel that stole a year of my life and became a terrible failure, it's actually in the UC Irvine archive, so nobody go find it. I was just doodling, and I drew the little characters that would become Ta and Sally and Boddington. And the joy was there in the sketch, where it was not on the page in the novel that I was writing.
Interesting.
And so a couple years later, when I got the opportunity to do some children's books, that was the first thing I did in a blitzkrieg. I did 4 books, the storyboard for 4 books in like a week. And then I took the next 2 or 3 months to paint them out and to get them published. But that doesn't happen to me very often. But I think that was a symptom of the joy being back.
Oh, yeah. We were just talking about being struck by inspiration.
Yeah.
That's definitely the...
Yeah.
It's cool, though, how being struck by inspiration for one type of project is going to lead to another. So did the children's book series, did that lead you to wanting or developing, like going back to the novel? Because you sounded like you had a bad experience with the first novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I did the children's books. And then this again goes back to the why. Like, why does an artist ever pick a particular topic to write about? I'm sure there's a lot of reasons. But for me, it's just sometimes an idea will just stick in me, and I'll just keep being fascinated about it. I have no idea why. I was obsessed with dinosaurs when I was younger. Now I'm like obsessed with prehistoric stuff, and I don't even know why, but the world just seems like a rich place for things to grow in. I just want to hang out there and see what happens. And so here's the children's books on one side of this. Oh, is that? The children's books are one level here. Game of Thrones is over here. And then the novel is like in the middle in terms of maturity level. So it just felt that's where I wanted to aim this. And it feels like after maybe aiming a little bit too far here in terms of maturity level, like a little bit too graphic and dark and so forth, and then aiming a little too childish, it feels like the needle has finally settled on a place that feels right. So one of my buddies who just read the book says, it feels like Game of Thrones mixed with Guardians of the Galaxy.
Well, that sounds fun.
That does sound
Oh, man,
fun.
that sounds super fun. Maybe we could get James Gunn to do the movie.
Hey, let's all about the movie, absolutely.
That's awesome. Now, when you did those two, you said about creating the characters. Did you do the drawing? That's wonderful. And so you're a physical artist in that way too, also an author.
Thanks.
Amazing.
I think that happened because my dad was a volunteer doctor in the Caribbean for 6 years when we were growing up. So we were homeschooled by my mom on the island of Grenada, like in the jungle. And we didn't have a lot to do besides hang out with each other and a friend who lived down the dirt path. And so we did a lot of drawing. So he and I and my brother would just draw like comics all the time. So that just developed. So I never was trained in art, or really besides like a class here or there.
Yeah, you just have that natural ability.
So we were both very curious, Shiree and I were very curious about your creative process.
Yes.
And so it sounds like visual inspiration is something that's part of your process. Could you walk us through, because most of the people listening are more involved with visual medium, right?
yeah.
So, like, how do you go from your concept to having a finished book in hand?
That's a great question. I would love to hear from you guys too, if you guys have one or two things that help you with your process.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that you felt it, that you just, you don't know necessarily where that came from. I have that feeling about different things that I just need to do, and I don't know why, but a strong sense that there's something I need to specifically paint or do. Do you feel that way, Scott?
Yeah, there are times where I feel that way, but a lot of the things that I'm doing in my business are client driven.
Correct. Same here.
Yeah, so the inspiration that I draw from is translated into the interpretation I perform on behalf of my clients. If they need to promote their business, how do I take the visual assets that I have? How do I walk into their space with my cinema kit and make it look as interesting as possible? The process is really about, for me, walking into a space and then trying to decipher where the natural light potential meets my potential for augmenting it with my lighting to create the most engaging image I can. And then on top of that's just the beginning. Then I have to start like pulling a performance out of the client, and that's a whole other skill set. But it's an equally artistic endeavor because you have that vision ahead of time of what you want in the film to elicit for the end viewer, but you have to figure out, given the starting point of how comfortable is the client talking to me on camera, how eloquent are they with their words, how detailed is their knowledge about their business. I have to figure out on the fly, how do I take all that stuff and then direct them into the place where I can fulfill that vision that we had already agreed on as a client-vendor relationship that we wanted to get to. Maybe more so than both of you guys, because you have the vision first of what you want to create. I think I might be presuming something on your part, James, but you probably have an overall idea of what the book should communicate before you start.
Well, this is so interesting because I can see why you like Steven Spielberg. Because when you're talking, I'm always envious because Spielberg, when he goes in, it does seem that he has a story. Like he's got Schindler's Ark, the book to do, where he's got Jurassic Park, and then he makes it Spielberg. That's why I love Jurassic Park, because it's the genius of Crichton who came up with this stuff, and then Spielberg takes it, and then together they make something that's like new. And I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it's creating that first level of what the story is. And I don't have it. I have a feeling, and again, to quote Michael Crichton, like every fully realized project that stems from that feeling is always a failure. It never achieves like with that feeling of potential that I have. But it's so exciting that I'm like, all right, I'm just going to dive into this and chase it. The second part of what you were talking about made me think about creating from a plan or creating spontaneously in the moment. And I think all three of our arts have phases where we're working from a plan and the plan doesn't work. And then hopefully we get some happy accidents or spontaneous stuff in the moment. But I'm currently in the second draft of the sequel to this. And so a lot of stuff has been thrown onto the page and is there. And I've got the chapters and the sandboxes, all the big stuff works, but it's still pretty thin. And so now I have to go in and every phase that I go through, I need discoveries. And by the time I get to 30 passes, hopefully in each pass I've added enough discoveries that push them all together, that when the reader experiences it going through the first time, they think I'm a genius because they're experiencing 30 levels of work at one time. But wow, this guy's really good. He knows what he's doing.
That's really interesting.
What do you mean by discoveries?
George R. R. Martin talks about, are you a pantser or a plotter? Are you a gardener or an architect? And do you lay out the blueprint for the whole novel beforehand? And then basically it's just color by number? Or do you just say, all right, here's the blank page, here's me, here's a vague idea of what I work with? And he says he's maybe more of a gardener, but he's in between. And that's what I found too, is like I do plot things out from the beginning as much as possible, but if I get what I expect, then it's not going to be good enough. So hopefully as I'm going along in the process of trying to make that happen, I'll discover something better.
Okay.
And then I'll go with that. And then in the second phase, I'll try, all right, let's reorient the piece towards there. And if that happens a lot, then by the end, hopefully you got something really surprising and cool.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Yeah, so it's really, for lack of, I'm not a writer, so I'm not as eloquent with the language, but it sounds like you're stumbling through to find what the characters want you to say about them.
Yeah, it does feel like that. It does feel like you're excavating a dinosaur skeleton. You're just brushing carefully and finding what's there. But stumbling is a good verb too, because I think one writer said writing a novel feels like pushing a peanut across a dirty floor with your nose for several years in a row.
That's, wow. All right, that paints a picture.
Yeah.
I can imagine what that's like.
So frustrating.
What I'm hearing is that you're going to be going down a path with a character, and then at some point you hit a dead end where you are going to have to backtrack and restructure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that does sound frustrating. But tell us about the reward in that process. Like,
totally.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're having this interview now and not a couple of years ago, because I might have just gone into a depressed silence for several minutes at this point. But a really cool thing happened to me at the beginning of the summer, which is that the publisher for Uruk sent me the first pass pages, which is like the formatted PDF of the book, how it's going to look with the right font. And they did such a cool job with it. It was amazing. But when they sent me the PDF, I was terrified to click on the PDF and open it. This was a final proof read through, but I couldn't make any more real changes. And every pass up to that point, copy edit phase, editor letter phase, I've been able to change it. And every time I'd gone back to the book and read it, I'd be like, oh, this is garbage. Like, I have so much work to do. I thought it was done. You have that feeling in the last draft where you finish it and you're like, I did it. I arrived. And then you wait 3 or 4 weeks and you get the next chance to look at it and you're like, I have not arrived. This is not good. That happens to me every time. But in a way, I've always hated my writing, you know? Because as a fellow artist, you care about your work. You care a lot about your work. And when you come back to it and you find it's not as good as your feeling and vision, to me, that's a painful feeling.
Time.
I'm always excited when something turns out like I envisioned it in my head, which is a small percentage of the time. But people see it very different than you do yourself. You look at, I'm only imagining because I've written poetry, which I don't care to share with anybody. But when you create something, all the emotional, physical, and mental pain that you went through and your frustration, crossing out, redoing years of work, whatever, but the person reading it has no clue about any of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. They love it. That's all they look at. Same with your work too, Scott.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I'm never satisfied with the things that I deliver in terms of, for my own sake, I've gotten very good at interpreting how my work is going to be seen by the client. So there's rarely revisions. You know, they rarely
They're
ask
happy
for,
with it.
they're almost always happy with it. But that's only because I've gotten deliberate about seeing things through their eyes. And I try to operate from that standpoint from the very beginning of the process, even though in my mind, it's almost like there's two people that are working on the same project at the same time. There's my professional self and then there's my artistic self. And the artistic self is nudging the pro to push things as far as he can, given the restraints of the budget and everything else. But the artist in me is never really truly satisfied. I want to make a Spielberg movie.
It sounds like you guys could. You should.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Are all artists perfectionists?
It's a great question because then you do have to let it go. I really relate to what you're saying. But luckily, this time when I couldn't click on the PDF for a whole day. I finally clicked on it, read it 2 or 3 hours that night, and then read it and finished it the next night. For the first time in my life, I was like, wow, I can let this go.
That's
I feel
awesome.
excited about this, and we did it. I finally got a novel that worked out there, and of course, there were things that I would want to change. And if it had been raw, if it had been a Word document, oh man, I would have been all over that. But seeing it in the typeset, knowing I couldn't do anything besides saying, okay, like this word got repeated or there's a period missing here, that kind of forced me to be more like a reader and step back, and I was able to enjoy it. So
Yeah.
I think this time, hopefully, we did it.
I have a question because I'm not familiar with all the process. So when a publisher sends back your book several times and you have this process of editing, do they get involved making suggestions and sentence structure and all that as well? Or do you have full control over everything that goes into
That's a good question.
to the book?
Our artists, writers definitely have a lot of say in it. My experience, this is my first time doing it, has been great. My editor, Tony, she pretty much everything she said I agreed with. I think maybe there's one or two where we're like, oh, like we could go here, and then we come up with a third solution. Tony had a pretty light touch. She didn't ask for anything dramatic. I don't know what would happen if someone did. I once had somebody read one of my things and she said, we should put more racism in here. Not as in like racism is good, obviously, but like that would make it more salable to the market because the market that you're looking to sell this piece in might be interested in having more of these types of issues. That wasn't what I was trying to do with that piece.
Interesting.
So that would be like an ideological conflict where maybe then
right.
we'll see how that conflict plays out. But with this editor, it's been amazing. She gave me notes and all the notes were super helpful. I did them. And then the copy edit came back. We sent it to copy editor, came back, and those were all great. I was so grateful. I'm like, people can actually see this work, and now I have a really smart editor, grammar person, finding that I don't know how phrases work. This is great. For me, this process, I was just so grateful every step along the way, and I wished I could have had 2 or 3 more passes, but I think we got there, so we'll see what happens next time.
That's really cool. How often does that happen that your publisher is going to try to interject some kind of current trend or some kind of current social issue that they think is going to make the book more marketable? And how does that play against your ownership of the work?
That's a great question. I'm sure you guys have answers yourselves because I feel like every writer, every artist has to answer that for themselves. because I do believe that the artist, to whatever degree they've decided to make this their vocation, has an opportunity and a responsibility to like deliver whatever unique vision they have in a way that, like, that's why I assume a lot of people got into it. And then there's gonna be forces out there, like some of my writer friends from UC Irvine. They had agents who were giving them politically tinged advice about what to do with this or that character and so forth. And for me, I'm always gonna side with the artist on that, because I say, listen, people have a right to push for this or that message from their organization, but the artist, if they feel it's important, should push back.
Yeah.
Because I think art is supposed to shake up the status quo. And I think art is supposed to push back and be a bit of an outsider.
Yeah.
And I think if we lose that and art becomes conformist, like nobody wants conformist artists. Like whoever wanted conformist musicians?
Yeah, no, from the time that Chuck Berry first started hammering his guitar, the movement of what rock and roll stands for could not be reversed because of what you just said. Nobody wants conformity. We want progression. We want to expand our horizons and our catalog of what's possible. So once you open up a bag, you can't close it. And that's an interesting topic, especially for this time in the history of humanity. It really is up to artists to try to bring awareness as much as possible. Unfortunately, the artist is not responsible for the reception. That could be a whole topic for a whole podcast. Shiree, how does this compare to your process? Because I see a lot of parallels in my filmmaking process.
I do too. And I think sticking true to yourself as an artist, not conforming to what is trending, that seems to be the thing in my own field. I know years ago when I first started doing abstract art, some of the designers and places that I would sell art would actually choose the colors for me. I want to see these. And you can tell those pieces, they don't have my heart in it. And it just made me feel sad, to be quite honest. Some of them sold, some I got stuck with that I've painted over several times. And most of my paintings that I have in my house, I've painted over 2 or 3 times. That they've morphed throughout the years.
Oh, that's interesting.
The longer I'm in the business, I do commission pieces. And of course, I want to provide something that my clientele love and everything, but I don't create art like that for spaces anymore where they dictate all the colors anymore. It really kills my joy.
Yeah.
If you were told that this is really popular and I think it'll sell really well if you write about this specific topic, and it's something that you can't get on board, could you even write it?
I don't think I could. Maybe if coincidentally we were both already excited about that topic, that would just be otherwise.
Yeah.
Selling yourself.
Because it's so personal. Like the stuff that's coming out is so from within inside. That makes sense. But that as somebody who makes a living from the writing, that does create internal conflict, however, right?
It does.
Yeah. Well, I forget who it was, but the famous musical person, Rodgers and Hammerstein type person, he was like, I've tried making them for the money, and it always turns out bad. Yeah. That's what I've heard. But if someone wants to pay me $1 million to write about something, I would explore that.
Would you? maybe you would do like what Prince did and just change your name to a symbol, just to stick it to him.
Totally.
That's funny.
And on the opposite side of that conversation, I think as artists, like, we're curious people, so we can get creative and interested in a lot of things.
Yeah,
and
that's
find
true.
our own weird angle on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's always a smart thing to do to give yourself a little bit of space. Like when a new idea is presented to you, to give yourself a little bit of space to explore it. Not always dismiss things right away. Obviously, if it's morally objectionable, then you can definitely hold your ground there. But if it's just something that you hadn't considered, give it a little bit of space. Very cool. Okay, and that's a good place, I think, to end this part 1 of our interview with James Zwerneman about how he writes novels, about his creative process. It's really cool to see other artists in their process, even when the artwork that they're creating is so different from our own. So no matter what kind of art you're into, I hope you got a lot out of this. And there's a lot more that James will go into when we share part 2 of the interview,
where he's going to talk more about the business side of writing novels. Really interesting stuff. So please stay tuned for part 2 of the interview with James Zwerneman. And of course, if you would like to learn more about what Shiree and I do as business coaches for artists, you can come visit us at our respective websites, ShireeNichole.com, ShireeNichole.com, or you can come visit me at reinventionstudiolab.com. That's Reinvention Studio Lab or ShireeNichole.com. In the meantime, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Emerging Artist Podcast, and I encourage you to rock on.